Harry and I took a run at hatching a plan to convince the Linksys board that we should turn Linksys into a Web3 company. But we got so enthusiastic about the power of DePIN that we actually bailed out of Linksys and started what became this company like 4 days later. And over a number of weeks and months of thinking about it, we came up with the concept of, what 375 AI is today.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Unleashing DePIN Podcast. My name is Tyler. I'm your host, and I'm really excited for this next conversation. This is a project with some awesome DePIN OGs who I'm excited to get to learn what they're doing. So please help me introduce Rob from 375 AI. Rob, how you doing?
Good, Tyler. Good to be with you, man.
I'm excited.
Love your stuff.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I've been big fans of everything you're doing. Been actually, ironically, working with Trevor on a DePIN proposals for different projects. He's been in the weeds, in the trenches, doing a lot of stuff, but you guys have been in the DePIN space for a while. And so I'm super excited to hear about what you're doing, this new project. So maybe for folks who are listening, can you just give a quick introduction about who you are, how you got here, and we can kick it off from there?
Yeah, absolutely. We're sort of feel like old man in the DePIN space now that we've been doing it for a massive 2.5 years. The founding team, myself, Trevor Brannon, and our CEO, Harry Dewhurst, we're all legacy Web 2 guys. I'm kind of the old man in the team. I came out of networking and cybersecurity for years and years. And then Harry and I ran a company that everybody seems to know called Linksys, the Wi-Fi router company. And that's really where the ideas for what has become 375 AI began, was when Harry and I were at Linksys. But we can pull into that later. That's really where it all started.
Really? I don't think I realized that you guys had your kind of Web 2 roots running Linksys. That's pretty impressive. I'm sure there's a lot to learn that we'll talk about how that's affecting things now. But before 375 AI, you guys were working on another project in the DePIN space. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of the first iteration of what became 375 was a company the same company, we just changed the name, was called Zeppelin. And we really started out, the concept was to be more or less super deployers of DePIN stuff everywhere. Like I said, when Harry and I were at Linksys and we were hatching a plan, I was on the board, Harry was the CEO, and we were hatching a plan how to resuscitate this 30-year-old company that was this incredible brand, but it really been pretty badly run for a long time. And we sort of stumbled into this idea of decentralized hardware. And my background I spent years working with companies like Juniper Networks and Fortinet and Palo Alto Networks, and always worked with carriers. And suddenly we saw this concept of, wow, here's a way to build out a large scale network, really of any kind, be it connectivity or otherwise, that is a really, Harry teases me, and I always say just a better mousetrap. Those build outs like that are massively capital intensive. There's a reason that only 3 carriers, really maybe 4, in the United States have ever tried to build a full network. And it's because it takes hundreds of millions of dollars and years to build out the scale. Harry and I took a run at hatching a plan to convince the Linksys board that we should turn Linksys into a Web3 company. I think it's still a great idea. Maybe next project. We got so enthusiastic about the power of DePIN that we actually bailed out of Linksys and started what became this company, Zeppelin Wireless, like 4 days later. And like I said, what we started out doing was really the first thing we did was we said, okay, as we look at these various projects, one of the things that's really hard to drive is scale in terms of locations to put the things and making sure that those locations are valuable. So we thought, all right, we're going to deploy all kinds of, it was called DY at the time, now DePIN, a little more broad. We're going to go big, deploy this stuff everywhere, but we want really, really high quality locations that we can provide to people to put these things. So we went and struck a really strategic deal with a company called Outfront Media. It's one of the couple largest billboard companies in the United States. And the observation we made was that these billboards by definition are in really interesting places with lots of people around them. And in the vast majority of cases, the most sophisticated piece of technology that's on a billboard is a light bulb. There's just this footprint massively underutilized. We started deploying DY gear on these billboards. We struck a 10-year deal with Outfront to have the exclusive rights to deploy decentralized infrastructure on their boards. And we started going like hell, putting Helium radios and XNet radios and all this stuff on these boards. That business is still kind of sitting there. We were very fortunate. We're big fans of projects like Helium and XNet, still big participants in those projects, but it's no longer really the core of the business, because really, as we looked at that footprint, we thought, okay, maybe there's something DePIN very cool. We like deploying other people's stuff. We don't love, frankly, being who we are and having built and run companies. We don't like not having any real control over how those projects are steering. Not that they're doing anything wrong necessarily. We just, it's in our nature. We like to control our destiny. Right. So we started thinking about, okay, what else could we do with these incredible locations? And over a number of weeks and months of thinking about it, we came up with the concept of what 375 AI is today, which is we call it a decentralized edge data intelligence network. So what we're deploying instead of Helium radios and XNet radios is sensors, real-time sensors that are gathering all kinds of multimodal data at the edge. Think of it as really the core of our largest device, our largest node. We've got a variety of hardware form factors we can get into, but the first one that we built and sold is called 375 Edge. It's a very powerful piece of technology that we built from the ground up. It is effectively a GPU capable piece of box with compute, storage, connectivity built in, a number of environmental sensors, sound, noise, light, what have you. But the core of it is really 6 high-res cameras that are basically observing everything that's going on around these things. They're deployed primarily on billboards on highways. And so they're looking at vehicle counts, make, model, color of car, how many people are in the car, license plates, commercial identifiers on trucks. Because what we found is there's a huge market. This is not a data set that's ever been available. The world is awash in digital data. What is really lacking, and you hear a lot of sort of the AI pundits talking about this, what is really lacking is making that linkage, AI and other apps, into the real world, right? In real time, both real time and sort of historical. So that was sort of our path from super deployer. We deployed over $1 million worth of Helium gear, hundreds of thousands of dollars of XNet gear. But then about a year and a half ago, we pivoted to focus on, okay, building our own platform, launching our own token, and becoming a DePIN project in our own right. So that's so been the path.
I have so many questions, starting with how the conversation at Linksys probably went when you're pitching the board that you support into a Web3 company.
Yeah, man.
What a fascinating journey that you went from deploying other hardware. As someone that's deployed a lot of hardware myself, I totally can empathize with that pain point of projects can change, a little less control. What was the genesis behind going after the types of data collection that you are, really seeing the gap in the market or this opportunity to collect what you're collecting? And what was the kind of the turning point for you guys that said, this is the type of DePIN project that we want to build? Is that something you can talk about a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's really just building on what I said, which is we were really looking at this footprint that we had access to via Outfront, and we're now starting to expand that internationally with other billboard providers. But what we really were realizing is, okay, there's this incredible footprint that then extends into, and when we get into some of our other hardware form factors, this will become more relevant, but these they call them out of home, all this stuff I've learned since I've never paid so much attention to billboards in my life. But these companies that run these billboards, they're effectively, they're real estate, they're REITs at the end of the day, right? They are real estate owners. They work to sell ad space. And you go from billboards also to take Outfront. Outfront's got about 40,000 billboards in the United States in pretty much all of what I call the NFL cities. That's sort of their market focus. But they also have almost 500,000 screens. So think of street furniture, displays on bus stops, displays in subways and all this. So there's this incredible footprint of exposure that's being underutilized. And Harry, one of my other co-founders, had a background I mentioned my background's been sort of infrastructure, networking, and security, mix of small and big companies. Harry's been an entrepreneur his whole career and has built and sold a number of companies centered on data and ways to harvest data. We're very focused, particularly because we're deploying cameras, on privacy, but deploying data sensors in ways that enable people to utilize this data to drive actionable insights in their business. And so just as we looked at this footprint and thought about, okay, what's the sort of best utilization of this in terms of a resource? And really, we looked at all kinds of things, literally all kinds of things, and things that we may add in the future. But the core of it all came back to data. And particularly in this brave new world of AI, the value of data is just multiplying every day, because all of these LLMs and various kinds of AI infrastructure, they need data, and the quality of the data that goes in is somewhat deterministic of the quality of what comes out, right? Still garbage in, garbage out. And so having access to really high fidelity, really accurate real world data just kept hitting us right between the eyes as this is a huge play. And the nice thing is, with that kind of data, and given Harry's background, we'll probably get into this later, but we've got some really near term kind of Web 2 use cases and channels for this data. We're already signing up data license agreements with people who are going to buy the data. And that's all great and can help us drive this sort of near term growth. But there's also this incredible long tail where, if you believe in smart infrastructure, if you believe in autonomous vehicles, there's this long tail of potential future use cases that we think build really the eventual hockey stick for what we're doing. So pretty cool. We're geeking out on it big time.
And so your devices, you're collecting a lot of different data, as you mentioned, things like cars and colors, and you can monitor other types of probably noise pollution, as you alluded to.
Yep.
Can you talk about some of the data groups that you're targeting, that you're looking for to capture, whether in just some near-term business opportunities that align with the information that you're capturing from these devices?
Yeah, absolutely. So it really falls into we think of as sort of 4 buckets. The first is advertisers and brands. Companies spend millions and millions and millions of dollars on out-of-home advertising, and it's not going anywhere, right? There are just thousands and hundreds of thousands of billboards. A lot of those billboards are converting to digital. Not a great way, unlike the digital world, for people to understand ad impressions, right? Or to understand demographics, right? They have to do it in very broad strokes. So obviously we're able to say for a particular billboard or near a billboard, not the billboard just that we're deployed on, but think of it within a mile or so of either side. We can tell people, okay, how many unique vehicles are going by this? How many people are in those vehicles? What's the make and model of the cars going by, which becomes an interesting sort of proxy for what's the demographic you're getting at. Is it all Ford F-150s or is it all Teslas and Rivians? So advertisers are a big category. As I mentioned, we're already in some agreements with big ad exchanges that want to take this data and add it to other data that they're getting and sell that on. So that's bucket 1. Bucket 2 is one of the pieces of data that we grab is any commercial vehicle that drives by one of our locations. And this is in the category of things I never noticed until I started looking for it. Most transport and logistics companies lease a huge percentage of the tractor trailers that move goods all over the country, right? And each of those tractor trailers has a unique identifier on it, right? A U.S. Department of Transportation number. The actual cab that's pulling it, what in the industry I've learned they call a power unit, also has a DOT number and has probably who the carrier is and phone numbers and all that. So we grab all of that data and convert it to metadata at the edge, because what it turns out happens is these companies that are leasing these tractor trailers, they lose track of them for months and years at a time because they get picked up by somebody the wrong way, or somebody's doing what they call a phantom load. And this turns out to be a multi-million-dollar problem for the trucking industry. What our nodes enable is, hey, query our data. Where did we last see this trailer? What was pulling it? What's the phone number on the cab that was pulling it? Who's the trucking company that was pulling it? And that enables those guys to find trailers, recover them. Obviously, otherwise they're making lease payments on trailers for nothing. So transport and logistics, and just companies tracking their own vehicles. This is a way to do that without having to install hardware on the vehicles themselves or in the tractor trailers, which is challenging and expensive for companies to do. So that second big bucket is what I would call transport and logistics. Third, interestingly, is like hedge funds, programmatic traders. Those guys are always looking for massive data sets that they can crunch and combine with other data to look for insights that enable them to build interesting and profitable trades. Turns out truck movements, particularly truck movements, are a really interesting leading indicator for the economy. If they start to see tractor trailer traffic on the roads dropping, then that's indicative of something. It's not my area, but these data sets are super valuable to them to enable them to develop trades that differentiate them in the market. So finance and hedge funds is bucket 3. And then the fourth big one is public, right? We're deploying in a very deterministic way. So We've built and sold our first 50 nodes of these 375 edge nodes. This is a very big, expensive piece of hardware. It's a $30,000 piece of hardware. Those are starting to get deployed next week in Los Angeles, New York, and Miami. So we're deploying, because we have access to the sites, third parties can buy our hardware, and we then tell them, hey, we're going to install it here. You can monitor it. It's a black box to them. The buyers of the equipment don't get the data. They go in these major metros, and we're doing them sort of one at a time. We think that in the next 18 months or so, we can pretty much cover the entire United States. And public perspective, if you're the city of Los Angeles, you want to look at things like, what are traffic conditions? What's road utilization? Is there debris on the road? Am I seeing pedestrians, on the I-5 in Bakersfield? There are all of these kinds of things that are useful to them, along with stolen vehicles, Amber Alerts, human trafficking. I mean, there are all kinds of use cases for this data for sort of public sector. So that's really the fourth big bucket that we're focused on in the near term. And the nice thing is one of the things that I think is different about how we're approaching the problem is, I think you see a lot, there's so much energy around DePIN, and the power of this model indescribable. And I think as a result of a lot of that excitement and investment, there's a tendency to see a real overbuild on the supply side. Take Helium, right? And again, we love those guys, but it's easy to overbuild before you really have revenue flowing on the other side of the equation. And getting that out of balance really causes some problems. In the case of Helium, we deployed all of this infrastructure, and the token value was kind of low. We didn't care. We were bullish. And then so we put all this stuff, and then we waited and we waited and we waited. And the token popped a little bit, and we pulled some chips off the table, and the token popped, and we pulled some chips off the table. But it was there's a high degree of volatility. Sure. Because we think we can drive these near-term revenue cases and build the network steadily but very deliberately. What we believe we can do, because one of the things that the way we manage the sort of overall equilibrium in the ecosystem is, when we do sell these data contracts, we take the vast majority, or our foundation rather takes the vast majority of that revenue and goes back into the market and buys our token and takes it up and burns it. If you think about over time, more revenue coming in, overall token supply shrinking, what you hope we build then is look, you're always going to have volatility in a token, but we think we can build a more stable sort of profile for the token, so that as this flywheel gets going, people are incented to continue deploying, because they can see, oh, this token is gaining in value as the demand side of this equation keeps pace with the supply side. Really important concept in terms of how we're building the network.
I love the thoughtfulness put into it. Having worked with your colleague on trying to shape different proposals within DePIN ecosystem, I know that there's been a lot of thought that's gone into that, and that's certainly going to translate into hopefully a economic model that sort of works for all participants. But as you mentioned,
absolutely, dude.
No way. It's just
yeah. But this is why I say we adore the Helium guys. Look, they're pioneers, and so much of what we're doing is built on the backs of those guys that figured out some of this stuff early, right? With all good intent, but they enabled all the rest of us to sit there and go like, okay, that was really good. That maybe not so good, and sort of tune as you go. We're super grateful to the guys who were doing this so early and really enabled us to learn. It's been super valuable.
We wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the pioneers within Helium and other projects who have been able to kind of test what's going to work and what's not going to work. And you guys are taking the best of that and putting it forward. I love that you're so focused on the different applications of data. And it seems like it's universal. There's so much that you can do over and above what is already happening today. I'm curious, do you foresee in the future that as you're collecting all this different types of data, that you'll become more of like a platform or sort of an aggregator for different folks to come in? So you're not the one directly going out and doing deals with hedge funds per se, but people will be able to come and access that directly. Is that part of your roadmap or how you're thinking about things in the future?
Absolutely. The interesting thing is that early days, we're very focused on enabling the folks who are going to be buying the data to buy it on existing rails that they already understand, with existing budget that they already have. Again, being very Web 2 legacy web, we're focused on what's the TAM here and how do we get at it, right?
Right.
And in the early days, we want to make sure that you can buy 375 tokens in order to buy 375 data, but you don't have to, right? We're working through channel partners, because right now the sales team is me and Trevor cutting deals with these guys who then enable us to reach a lot more consumers. But absolutely, in the fullness of time, particularly as we get to some of the other hardware and software that we're deploying, what you basically end up with is a giant programmable data network where not only do we have warehouse of historical data that gets more and more valuable the longer we're out there, right? There's very much real-time use cases, but we think there's tremendous value in once we've been deployed in LA for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 5 years, there's data being able to look at, okay, historically what's happening at a level of granularity that's really never been possible. So over time, as you have that, you have our 375 Go mobile app, which is itself a sensor that can do a variety of things. It maps network signal strength. It eventually will add more. We're launching with network mapping as the primary feature, but we'll be able to add light sensing, sound sensing, all kinds of interesting things. We will definitely build the ability for people to just query our data and say, hey, how many Priuses have you seen in LA in the last 6 months? You know, I need over the next 48 hours. And this is where it gets super cool to think about. When you've got thousands of 375 Go mobile users, you can incent them to say, look, over the next 48 hours, I need light level samples in LA, right? And I need them at these times of day, or I need noise level samples, or I need pictures of real-time prices of gasoline as you're driving around, snap pictures of gasoline price signs in real time. And we can correlate and kind of gather all that data up and feed it back to the people in a portal. The power of that for so many things, app developers, what have you, is super exciting. So yeah, there are going to be more and more ways to get at our data and utilize it after we get these initial deployments going and start building the base.
Very cool. It's so incredible. I'm so excited to think about all. You just imagine if you're interested in purchasing a property, you want to be able to see how much, traffic's going through. If you want to just, the possibilities are endless. The fact that you're bringing the digital age rendered the traditional billboard, not necessarily obsolete, but you lost all the benefits of tracking and impressions and all these metrics that marketers use. That's just one application. There's so many you'll be able to apply in the future. My brain's just spinning.
I know. You can spin on it for a while.
That's amazing. No. Talk to me a little bit about the hardware. You mentioned they're big devices. $30,000 is certainly no $200 device you're plugging in your house.
It's not a hobbyist thing.
Obviously, you guys have had some experience in the hardware space coming from Linksys. Just talk to me a little bit about how you built your nodes, your hardware, what went into them. Is that something you can talk about a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the big nodes are really, it's a fascinating piece of technology, right? And you're right, Harry, you sit and think about your career. I never thought that it was the hardware experience that I had that was going to be a differentiator at some point, but it really has turned out that way. These are, like I said, these are big, expensive pieces of kit. They need to be weatherproof. They need to be, we want them to be fanless, right? We don't want things out there in the world that can fail easily. So as we design this thing, and we're working with a great design partner, basically the units are sort of, yay big. The enclosures are carved out of solid blocks of aluminum. And all of the internal components, the GPU, the CPU, everything are, affixed directly to that aluminum housing. So effectively the housing acts like a big heat sink, right? So we don't need fans. They stay cool. They're weatherproof. You can spray them with a fire hose, all this, and they've been tested 6 ways from Sunday. So a lot of thinking and development into the hardware because we need it to sit out there and run for years without needing to be maintained. And that's not a trivial problem to fix. So certainly a lot went into that. Those are getting deployed really by what I would call, it's a mixture, right? We sold about $1 million, these in our first batch, that we sold them basically at our cost. Our model is not to make a bunch of money on the hardware. It's to build the data network. We sell them more or less at cost. And those are getting deployed by people who look at it like we did with Helium. So people who will spend $30,000, or we limited people to buying 2 nodes at the start because we want the project to be very decentralized. We had people who wanted to come buy all 50, and we're like, no, we're doing 2 per customer at this point. Yeah. Those are being deployed by either serious enthusiasts. We had a bunch of people in Asia buy them. One of the interesting things, unlike Helium, side note here, is, again, so much we've learned from Helium and our prior experiences. When we started deploying Helium gear on billboards, we realized that finding good locations is really hard. And then figuring out how to deploy the infrastructure is not simple, right? And there are professional deployers like Zeppelin was, like you may have heard of guys called LongFi. They deploy a lot of DePIN stuff. Love those guys, work really closely with them. Figuring out how to deploy this stuff is a big lift. So, we're deploying these big nodes in a managed services model. More than half of the people that bought our first node run are in Asia. They want to participate in the project, but because they don't ever have to touch the box, right? We put it on as a managed services model. Doesn't matter. Their nodes are deployed in LA. They can be in Asia or Europe or wherever and participate in the project. We are also working on, very soon, we'll launch the ability to sell fractionalized portions of these nodes and tokenize, so that if people want, hey, look, I don't want to pay $30,000 for a node, but I'd pay $5,000. Okay, you're going to get a slice of a node, and the rewards get split on chain. Everything's obviously transparent and visible. So that'll enable an even broader participation there. As we move down the line, we're finishing sort of design phase on 2 new pieces of hardware that I'll foreshadow here that I'm super excited about, that will further expand the universe of people that can participate in the project. The first is called 375 Street. This is, you could think of it as a miniaturized version of a 375 Edge, still dual camera in one housing, as opposed to 6 cameras looking in every direction. Still GPU at the edge. So we're still doing all the compute and all of the conversion of the video data to metadata at the edge. These things are able to be deployed in urban environments, basically. So think of front of a coffee shop. The same kinds of people that would deploy, say, a Helium hotspot or an XNet hotspot can deploy a 375 Street. It looks at the street in a metro like New York or Miami. It's looking at a lot of the same kinds of data, but then also getting footfall traffic, right? Looking at people that are going by and counting them, or saying, oh, this guy's holding a Starbucks cup and this guy's got a cup from Pete's. We'll see what additional use cases emerge out of that, but that'll be a device that someone can get into for order of $1,000 instead of 30. The next piece of the puzzle, and these are both things that we will start pre-selling in Q1 and then launch into the market by the end of Q2, is the goal, is when you think about ultimately our finished product is data, right? And we need to keep all of the data that we're gathering, because as I mentioned, you've got these historical use cases as well. Well, it turns out storing petabytes and petabytes of data over time in S3 buckets, not a super cost-effective way to do that. So we're launching a device called 375 Vault that is a solid state storage device, $200-300 that literally any consumer anywhere in the world can buy, set it and forget it, plug it in their house, connect it to their Wi-Fi or their network, and leave it alone. And what those 375 vaults become is effectively a distributed data lake for all of the data that we're collecting for long-term storage, right? And those users, again, earn tokens for, in that case, not for providing sensor data, but for providing storage to the network. So super exciting. That'll be another way that people can participate that is, again, overall additive, efficiency driven for the project. One of the things I love about this ecosystem is managing a bunch of distributed storage nodes is also not a trivial problem, but happily, and I'm not going to throw any names around yet, but people can guess probably who the handful of people are that can do this. There are already DePIN projects out there working on distributed storage and how that gets managed and utilized. And so we're working with some industry partners in that to say, okay, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We want to provide the hardware. We want to do the monitoring. But in terms of that software stack and how do you manage a huge distributed body of data, we've got some really great inputs and partnering opportunities in the industry already. Because again, one of the things that we fell in love with immediately is that decentralized aspect of this and this notion of community participation and everybody pitching in to build this incredible machinery. So we're trying to decentralize every bit of this that we can. And so that then gets us, when you think about the overall footprint, you've got the big nodes, 375 Edge, and then Street and Vault, and then the mobile app effectively as the smallest sensor also earns tokens. And anybody who wants to play and participate in this incredible ecosystem has an entry point that they want, right? So we're super stoked about getting that new hardware out.
Yeah. One of the things that I was curious about is, are you looking at, you talked about collaboration and working with other decentralized projects. Are you looking at integrating other types of, whether it's LoRaWAN into the hardware or other types of connectivity for these devices? Is that something that is relevant or potentially how you're thinking about things in the future?
Yeah, it's a great question, man. And it's super relevant and it goes way beyond connectivity, right? So we built the hardware in a very modular way. And again, I continue dating myself, but when you look at how the interplay of hardware and software has evolved, if you go all the way back in sort of networking and you started out where everybody selling networking gear had a proprietary closed system. Right. And so if I'm a service provider, I had to pick, I'm going to use Juniper, I'm going to use Ericsson, or I'm going to use Nokia, Siemens, or I'm going to pick one you're going to use and that's it. And over a reasonably short period of time, that sort of purpose-built hardware evolved to a more open platform with software differentiation and different kinds of software that you could deploy on that hardware. So flip over to the DePIN ecosystem. What you've got is tons of projects, each of whom are shipping out their stuff with their own little Raspberry Pi that is their gateway. This is true of Helium and all the DY guys. This is true of guys like GeoNet, the weather sensor guys. They all have these little gateways. There's no reason that needs to be built on proprietary hardware. Eventually that just becomes a piece of software that gets run in a container. And so you're absolutely right. We built the hardware in a way that we can add, and we think over time, we will have this scaled network that can become really a jumping off point or an accelerator for other DePIN projects that say, hey, I don't need to figure out how to ship 100,000 physical devices to get scale. I can deploy software and push it and gain scale much more quickly. So we absolutely think about being a jumping off point for other projects, integrating different kinds of antennas, different kinds of sensors, and then letting some, again, we're sort of it's funny, Tyler, taking it to its logical extreme, and Harry describes it this way sometimes. You can see it evolve to a point where you go to AWS or Google to get storage or to get compute, right? Google and AWS don't particularly care what you do with that, right? What they're providing you is that kind of raw material that you can start with. And we feel like we can be that both for data. We become AWS, Google if you need edge data, but also these edge compute resources become valuable in a lot of different slots as well, because edge compute is not a new concept, obviously. And the notion of deploying compute closer to the data or things that compute needs to crunch is not novel. But again, one of the things that DePIN, we think, eliminates is friction, right? So if you're a big provider and you're saying, okay, now I need edge compute, that's great. And that's more efficient from a compute perspective, but it adds friction because now you've got to manage a server that's not in a centralized location. It's out in the wild somewhere, right? And so although it's efficient on the compute side, it's less efficient on the deployment side. It's actually harder. Over time, even though edge compute is not a new thing, having a universe of things out there built running that can be utilized, you then spawn this whole additional set of use cases just based on the compute resources sitting there and the ability to tap into things out at the edge. So it gets pretty exciting on that front as well.
So fascinating. I'm curious, obviously you guys have spent a lot of time thinking through the token economic model. I was curious around how you're rewarding these different deployers from, is it based on how much data they're collecting, and then gets used? Can you talk through that a little bit? Because obviously you want to be collecting as much data as you can, but how much of that's useful? How does that translate into kind of a monetary side on the demand side? Is that something you can talk about a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I have to thank the Helium guys because we learned a lot from them in this regard. So we will follow, I think, a very similar path to what Helium did. If you look at how Helium ran in the early, and I'm talking specifically, to be clear, not about IoT, but about the Helium mobile, right? So deploying CBRS radios. They started out in a model where basically if you deploy a radio, this piece of hardware, then this is the reward you get. It was based purely on what the hardware was. Problem with that is you could deploy that hardware in theory in a useless location and still get the same reward, right? So that enabled the gaming of the system, right? Yeah. So very quickly, the Helium guys figured out, okay, that's not great. We're going to move to a model that's based on modeled coverage. So they would take the equipment that you were deploying, they would look at based on the strength of the radio and the topology to say, okay, this is basically the coverage providing, and we're going to reward you based on that modeled coverage, right? And then they proceed finally to the step where the reward is really based on how much data is flowing through that specific node that they're then able to monetize, right? So it's very logical in terms of the way it proceeds, and they discovered and fixed problems as they went. So we're starting in a very similar spot, fall prey to the gaming concept, because with the early nodes, we're actually designating the locations. But take the 375 edge nodes, for example. In the first iteration, there's a set reward that's given to all of the 375 edge nodes per epoch. And that reward is split evenly between all the edge nodes, right? What we will evolve to very quickly, and certainly by the time we're launching Street, is a model that's based on the quantum of data, right? How many actual data objects are we grabbing at a particular location, right? Because then we enable people to deploy. We want to make sure that someone can't take a 375 street node and stick it on their back porch and be taking pictures of deer and get an outsized reward, right? So that will be then based on sort of quantum of data. What we expect to evolve to reasonably quickly is then a qualitative measure where nodes will get rewarded based on actual data monetization, right? If the data coming out of the edge nodes is being bought for X price, the smart contracts will all just figure out, okay, this is how much that node gets. This is how much that node gets. And we'll be able to, again, it's maintaining that demand side equilibrium that enables that to work, right? So we will run that same play effectively to make sure that it'll eliminate or minimize opportunities for people to game, which then, look, it's good if there are people out there making money in your token. It's easy to tell yourself that's good. But if that's to the detriment of people who are really doing the work, getting the nodes there, getting them in good locations, then we don't want to set up the opportunity for people to do that and just be a free rider on the back of it.
No, I think that's a super logical approach. It's obviously not something that you're able to implement day one by having the qualitative aspect, right. But the fact that you're thinking this is an iterative rollout, I think that makes a ton of sense. Speaking of rollouts, and you mentioned that the first batch is going to be in LA, Miami, and New York. You've designated the areas where folks can go and deploy. What's the timeline for rolling that out to the US, potentially globally?
Yeah, we're starting, and I think I mentioned we're picking discrete markets because, again, all comes back to demand side. If you think about it, if we stuck these things everywhere or anywhere and enabled people to do that, if we had only 50 nodes to start with, which we're starting with 50 nodes, if you have one in every city, that doesn't drive a lot of value. So we're picking off major metros one at a time. As I mentioned, New York, LA, and Miami are getting deployed in Q4, early Q1. And then really over TBD, we think that we should be able to add at least one or two other major metros per quarter as we go, if not faster. One of the things we learned deploying Helium is you can optimize a lot around the physical installs. Part of the reason that for the big nodes, we're managing the vast majority of the physical installs ourselves. Funny story, when we did our first Helium deployment, we deployed a cluster in LA and it was like 6 locations, 2 or 3 radios per location. And it took us almost 3 months to get all those radios up and functional. Fast forward 6 months, we did a big XNet cluster in Houston and we deployed 15 locations, 45 radios in 3 days. You really can optimize around this. So we think we're trying to be reasonably conservative, but we think that when you do the math within the next 18 months, we should have coverage in pretty much every major metro in the US. And the really interesting thing I think about that, and again, it comes back to demand side, is when you think about the value of the data, when we're just in LA, New York, and Miami, we will not yet have sort of a national data set that says, okay, here's what's going on in the US writ large. But we have data sets that are valuable for companies, people who are interested in LA, New York, Miami. Sure. And then we add Chicago, and then we add Phoenix, and then we add fill in the blanks. And so that data with each metro that we add, the overall value of the larger data set grows. And coming back to the historical point, the more that overall data set grows in terms of its historical depth, the more value it gets, right? So the sort of the intrinsic value of the data set is accelerating every time we deploy another node, every time we add a metro, every day that the network sits out there and continues collecting data. Yeah, we think we're focused on the US initially. We're already having conversations around a possible deployment in the Middle East. We've had lots and lots of inbound interest to say, hey, can you get me? We've had some crazy stuff too. Hey, I really would like data out of Russia. Can you get me that? And I'm like, oh, I don't know. I don't want to like have Vladimir Putin knocking on my door, but there's a huge demand for this kind of data. And we think that we can get to real scale in a reasonably short time frame.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. I think most folks are going to appreciate how not only did you've got the scar tissue from having deployed, gone through the evolution of these other projects, but the fact that you're doing it so iteratively, very logical. I just love how much thought has been put into that. And it's really clear and obvious in your guys' go-to-market plan. But one other question I had was your mobile app. What's the timeline? Is that available now? Can folks download that? When will it be available if it's not? Do you have any information for us?
Yeah. So we've got a mobile app both for iOS and Android. They both praise the Lord. We finally got our iOS app approved like last week. That was an up at dawn, pride swallowing seed. So they're both approved. We expect, my dev guys will shoot me if I give you a date, but we expect that we will launch the mobile apps on the Solana DevNet in the next few weeks. So people will be able to get those started. We're the theme. We're trying to be thoughtful. We want to go fast, but we want to go carefully. So we'll do a limited initial release on DevNet. People earn DevNet tokens, and then we'll do an airdrop once the network goes live on mainnet. So yeah, I think we're 2-3 weeks from having the mobile app available for a huge chunk of people that want to start playing with it. The mobile app is super slick. It basically, because what it's doing is as you walk around, the mobile app is basically taking snapshots of what network are you connected to, what's your signal strength, what's your data rate. And so we're building this real-time map of connectivity, both cellular networks and then Wi-Fi networks that you connect to. It also maps open Wi-Fi networks that it can see whether or not you connect to them. And so you go in the app and you can see all the hexes that you've covered. And we've got a bunch of gamified stuff to incent people to cover more hexes. And did you cover 5 hexes in one day? So it's going to be really fun. We think the app is going to be a huge part of this. And it's really interesting when you think about, we have not even started to scratch the surface of the power of the app, because we really wanted to have the app out early at the same time as the big nodes, because we want to enable broader participation. But there's these phones, Apple's finally releasing their AI capabilities. These phones have incredible compute power and incredible things that they can do. And there's just a ton that's untapped there, right? And as long as we're mindful about battery life, which we always are, but you can do really interesting things and sending people to use their phones as part of the network. Yeah, we're super stoked about the app coming out. So 2-3 weeks, and we're almost there.
Okay, I love that. And we'll definitely have that listed on our DePIN Pulse site, which is our earning aggregator for folks to go find projects, get involved, both hardware that'll be coming out as well as the app, so people can go download that. I also appreciate that you're cognizant of battery life. Ironically, I was in Disneyland this last week with my family, and my brother-in-law was like, "God, your phone dies so quickly. Why is it dying?" I said, "Yeah, I've got all these crypto DePIN apps, and they're sucking out of my battery." So I appreciate that you guys are being thoughtful about that. And folks,
yeah, dude, I start having panic attacks when my phone gets below 20%. I'm like looking for a charger.
Yeah. Oh no, it's certainly, everybody has that pain. Rob, this has been so interesting. I've been just loving to hear about all the things that you guys are doing. This is a fascinating project. Was there anything else we didn't get a chance to cover that you just think is relevant for folks to know?
No, I think stay tuned. We're always pushing out updates and content. Follow us on X. We've got a Discord, the website, 375.ai. We're always pushing updates there. So just stay tuned. I know we're trying to get to where there are, as quickly as possible, there are ways for people to engage and participate. But in the meantime, the more the merrier. We'd love to see people poking around, seeing what we're up to. We've got our own we're doing a series of spaces on X called DePIN Highway, where we get other DePIN projects in and we geek out for half an hour, 45 minutes, and talk about all the cool stuff that's happening in the space. So you can check that out. But yeah, stay tuned. We're about to mash the pedal.
Oh, we're excited for it. Well, definitely have all that information linked below, your Twitter, Discord, website, so folks can go check that out. Gosh, Rob, this has been so fascinating. Like I said, I'm really excited about what you're doing. I think anybody that listens to this is going to appreciate how much thoughtfulness has gone in. You're tackling a huge problem and you're doing it in a super novel way, leveraging DePIN, which is just the best of both worlds. But really want to thank you again. This has been an amazing conversation, and we'll have all that information linked for folks below. Please go check out 375AI, go follow Rob, go check out their website. Definitely tune into their Twitter space. I'm going to certainly join the next one. But that being said, we'll wrap it up here, everybody. Rob, thank you so much again for coming on.
Thanks, Tyler. This was great, man.
Thank you.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.